Thank you very much, Michelle, for that wonderful, inspiring lecture tonight. I think you'll all agree that it was an extremely wide-ranging, comprehensive lecture, and at the same time hit the very core of what we should be doing in the post-2015 agenda. I must say that it didn't surprise me that we got such a fine lecture here tonight, and it didn't surprise me that she hit on all of the issues that are absolutely crucial to a proper development programme moving forward in the coming years. The focus, the identification on human rights, the United Nations Charter of Human Rights as the basic principles for action. The fact that equality is at the core of any approach, inclusion at the core, that gender equality is the essential part of equality, because that is the equality between men and women, and that is absolutely essential if we are going to move forward. And then to identify the fact that development per se, and particularly economic development per se, is not the solution. That over 70% of the middle-income countries, that more than 70% of poverty is to be found in middle-income countries. So countries that have come out of development, statistically, have not come out of inequality. And that is really very much part and parcel, which Michelle has identified here tonight. And the second major area that she has focused on is leadership. And that leadership has to be inclusive, it has to be removed from the top-down approach, it must be consultative, it must be participative, it must be a new approach, and that it must combine with a social contract. And that in that way we can look to the post-2015 approach in a very positive fashion. And of course, equality of itself is right in principle, but it is also the best thing for any country in its practice, in its economic situation, in the quality of society. And she identified it as one of the greatest challenges of this century. So we are actually very fortunate in this country that we have, during the Irish presidency, an opportunity to some extent frame the structures moving forward in relation to the post-2015 agenda. And the objective of the elimination of extreme poverty through sustainable development is part of what we have to look at doing over the next 15 years. The next generation has the tools and the mechanisms to eliminate extreme poverty, but it can only do that through proper leadership, and it can only do that by having an egalitarian approach. So those are the challenges that we have. We have at least agreed one of them, which we agreed last weekend with the 27 members of the European Union, that we would agree to have a common framework that would combine and integrate the Sustainable Development Goals and the Millennium Development Goals. And now we will be looking forward to trying to progress that further down the road over the next number of months. And again, we are very privileged in Ireland that the Secretary-General of the United Nations has appointed our permanent representative in the United Nations, Anne Anderson, as the co-facilitator of this first summit on the post-Millennium Development Goals in post-2015. So we will be able to feed all of that into the first major review of the MDGs. But I want to thank Michelle for outlining to us tonight how she sees we should be approaching it. What are the priority issues and what are the mechanisms? What are the priorities? What is the process? And I think if we get that right, we'll be going a long way. So now I have the opportunity to invite a number of people to ask a number of questions. I'm told that they have to be brief. We've got approximately half an hour, and Michelle will answer all the questions. I'm answering no questions at all tonight. So I will take 3 people in turn, and then perhaps Michelle will answer those 3, and then I'll take another 3. So the first person is Professor Susan Murphy, who is the Secretary of Development Studies Association of Ireland and is coordinator of the Masters in Development Practice in Trinity College Dublin. Susan, not more than 2 minutes.
Thank you, Minister. Firstly, let me thank Madame Bachelet for a powerful and invigorating lecture. And secondly, I'd like to thank the organisers of the event for hosting this important event and also giving us this wonderful opportunity to engage in a discussion with one of the world's leading figures influencing policies on gender equality and women's empowerment. My question is concerned with the matter of freedom, more specifically the matter of freedom to reason and to make choices for oneself. There is no doubt that MDG 3, for example, has resulted in substantial practical gains for men and women, girls and boys across the globe. However, behind the numbers, evidence, as you yourself have said, suggests that in everyday life, the status of women and girls as human beings of equal moral worth and value is not respected and is, in many cases, simply not recognised. Women continue to lack access to and control over resources and decision-making at the individual level and household level, and on a daily basis, hundreds of millions of women experience violence, harmful social norms, and multiple forms of discrimination. Many have argued that the Millennium Development Goals were too narrow and that they lacked transformative power. So my question is, in the post-2015 agenda, what specifically will be those transformative goals that will secure equality of opportunity for women, and indeed that can give rise to the transformation in gender power relations, such that women can secure the freedoms to make choices and pursue the interests and activities that they themselves have reason to value? Thank you.
Very much, Susan. You kept well within the time there. So secondly, Dr. Melanie Hoare, UCD Institute for British and Irish Studies and School of Politics and International Relations. Melanie.
Thank you very much. I again would like to extend my thank you for this very inspirational lecture you gave tonight, and to the organisers as well, to give us the opportunity to ask you some questions here. Madame Bachelet, you have so eloquently talked about the grave challenges women are still facing, being affected disproportionately by conflict, and yet still being largely absent in political decision-making that shaped their lives post-conflict. In an international seminar we are organising in the UCD Institute for British Irish Studies on the 5th of April, we will be looking at opportunities, innovational potential and central questions arising from international, regional and national processes to implement Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. As we are honoured to have you with us tonight, I would like to ask you, what do you feel are the central challenges in moving beyond the symbolic significance of these instruments like Security Council Resolution 1325 and subsequent resolutions, and what will help us to make them a meaningful and effective tool for developing a more equal society and a more substantial peace? Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. And finally, for this tranche, Kate O'Donnell, who is a student, UCD undergraduate, volunteers overseas and campaigns and awareness officer. Kate.
I'd also like to say thank you very much for your inspiring lecture. And my question is, do you think the UN can coordinate a more bottom-up approach in relation to the issue of women in light of varying and country-specific social and cultural norms? And therefore, do you think it would be possible for the post-2015 development project to include specific social protection goals for implementation across all countries? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kate. Michelle.
I would say in the current situation, there's nothing yet defined on what's going to happen in the post-2015 development frameworks. People are starting, and what we have been trying to do, and it's linked to both of the questions, is to include people, the real people on the streets, the women in the case, to say what's the future they want and how they will, which are their priorities, and how they will want that these priorities would be represented in this new framework, so it will mean that countries will, on one hand, commit to them, and second, held accountable, if I may say, to them. Having said that, I would say there's a lot of criticism on MDGs. I mentioned some of them in a polite way, in the sense that it did not went into the roots of discrimination, inequality, etc. But the other big criticism from civil society is that it was not comprehensive enough. As you say, it was restrictive in all areas, and of course on women issues. And on the other hand, it was a process top-down. So what we are doing now, and I think this is an opportunity where nothing is written yet, so it's a huge opportunity to be very active and try to influence of what we think it could be the most important thing in a transformative agenda, is on one hand on the process, that the process has to be participative. And what UN Women is doing worldwide is organizing in every country where we have presence, or with the UN country team, that is to your other question, these consultations, this work on the ground. For us in UN Women is not a particular situation. I have a global advisory board of civil society that advises me, and and all my offices, not yet all have achieved it, but has the instruction to develop civil society advisory boards at country, at sub-regional and regional levels. And in that work, and including, of course, ministries of gender affairs or other ministries, we are developing these regional and national consultations, because we want not only what it was already in that report that I was mentioning, and it's open, and I think it will be very interesting to go into that report, because it's not only on gender equality, it's on inequalities as a whole, but it poses the challenges and difficulties, and how in this new framework we, how could I say, organize all the different aspects. Because some people believe it should be inequalities, a stand-alone goal, and all the rest order behind it. So eradication of poverty or gender equality. Some others said gender equality should not be a stand-alone goal. However, whatever the indicators are and the particular targets, they say no, 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 no. If we really want to achieve gender equality, it has to be a cross-cutting issue. Because otherwise, it's like typical when you see in government is the Minister of Gender Affairs, and he's usually the weakest politically and financially, etc. But having said that, and it has to be cross-cutting all the different priorities that the new agenda will establish, I believe personally, if you don't have a stand-alone goal, it will disappear. Because with mainstreaming, we have seen always that. Everyone's responsible, no one is responsible. And you ask and you go to a country, but where is gender equality? Oh, it's there. There. And who is giving money to it? Everyone. And the second problem with mainstreaming only is that you don't see the results in the short term. So you don't improve people's life. So what I'm to say, we want it exactly that whatever comes, it has to be not only average. Of course, we need to improve all of that, but it has to be transformative change that has to include. And we're working on which will be, but we also want to know what women believe on that. It's not only what we in UN Women in New York decide are the elements. So I would say now we are in the process of starting working. We have had meetings with experts around the world. And I have to say, for my surprise, the majority of the women who came from all over the world said, we don't like what's going on, we don't believe in it, because we saw what MDGs were, and we don't want women to be, at the end, limited to a very particular issue. We want a good and comprehensive narrative. But to tell you the truth, we need both. We need a very good, integrative, fantastic, the best possible comprehensive document and narrative, but we need countries, governments, parliaments to commit and to feel accountable for it. So it will never be a perfect process. But now we have the opportunity to shape it. And that's my invitation. And also, as I said to you, we are doing it. And of course, funding is a little problem right now, as you have heard about economic crisis, I believe, and you have lived it. So we have some problems, but we're trying and we're trying to use social media also. But social media leaves always out all the most poorest, vulnerable, and grassroots organization of women. So we're trying to organize different kinds of ways so people can make their voices heard. In terms of 1325, yes, I didn't go into more details. The truth is that 1325, the Security Council Resolution on Women, Peace and Security, that this year will celebrate, I think, 12, if I'm not wrong, years old. 13. Oh, it was 2000, yeah. Well, 12 years, because it's a year, complete year. The truth is there has been a lot of good resolutions regarding women as victims. Very few as women as peace builders, peacemakers, agents of change, agents of development. And that has been my main message to the Security Council every time I go there and report on advances, progress, and slow progress on many of these issues. The Secretary General has a big commitment and during his term has appointed an unprecedented number of women in high-level positions. When I arrived to the UN, what I heard is there's no women. I asked why there are no more women mediators or negotiators, and the answer was they don't have the skills to do it. Well, I think there's thousands of women diplomats, for example, or experts in negotiation. They negotiate every day. We all negotiate every day in different areas of our lives, don't we? So, but anyway, I said, okay, let's take it as a fact, because maybe we have in some parts of the world big amounts of women very capable, and maybe in some others they don't feel capable enough. So we started with the Department of Political Affairs training on skills of mediation, negotiations, and right now we have a roster of 200 women prepared on this in West Africa and South Asia. And for example, I went to Mali some weeks ago, and to first of all meet the displaced women who were victims of so many violations in the north of the country and had to go to Bamako. But also I opened the seminar and workshop for women who were being trained as mediators. But with this issue, as with every issue linked to women, there's a lot of very good resolutions. There is a lot of very good documents, but from words to action is a huge gap. And it's so complicated every time. It's just not, I don't know if here or here, it's just not there. So we need to continue working. We have to provide, or at least to not permit any excuses, because I truly believe when you look at what has happened, the evaluation of the peace agreement is a very bad evaluation when after 5 years, 50% have failed. So we have a problem. So I'm not saying that the inclusion of women will solve problems that are much more structural than that. But it's true that women are the ones who don't want to continue losing their children, their husband, and will do whatever is needed to really ensure peace. So, and they were part of the process of peace, of getting into peace. Of course, we know the fantastic experience of Liberia, but women everywhere have been very important in all the conflicts and in terms of building peace. So, but again, now we have developed indicators, and we are reporting every year to the Security Council how much progress has been made. But we just started last year. So I think we have the tools, but I believe we need to continue pushing very strongly so more women are part of this kind of situation, because I truly believe that without women, or without addressing women's needs and concerns in the peace agreement, peace will not be sustainable. When you look at the numbers of peace settlements that don't even mention the word women, don't even mention the word sexual violence, and in all of this conflict, there was thousands of women. There's no redress or reparation measures to women. You understand that they're still there, something that's there, you know, like something hot that is not cool enough. So I truly believe it won't solve the peace of the world, but it will help.
Thanks, Michelle. Now I'll call on Professor Carol Newman, Trinity International Development Initiative, TIDI, and Department of Economics, Trinity College Dublin.
Thank you very much, and thank you for such a wonderful speech and such fantastic responses to the first set of questions. And my question actually is also in relation to social and cultural norms, which seems to be something that is on everybody's mind here this evening. You spoke in your speech about the importance of increasing female representation in leadership roles, in politics, and also in business, and legislation preventing the discrimination of women being important, and also directly placing more resources in the hands of women. And these are all important inputs into increasing equalities of opportunity. But can they really have any long-term effects if customary laws that discriminate against minority groups, such as women, prevail at grassroots level? And dislodging such cultural and social norms takes time. So what is the appropriate time frame for a post-2015 development agenda? And how can we get a long-term time frame that matches with political cycles? And moreover, how can support be garnered from governments where such change may not be in their interests in a political way? Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. And next is Wan Ma, student UCD, Chinese Students and Scholars Association. I hope I haven't mangled your name there, Wan.
Your pronunciation is perfect. First of all, thank you very much, Ms. Bachelet, for your very inspiring speech, and thanks for the organizers to give me this opportunity to ask you 2 questions. My first question is concerning about the women development progress in China, because I'm a member of the Chinese Students and Scholars Association here. Promoting the equality between men and women is a basic state policy in China, and China has made great efforts to implement this policy. But now in the current context, the family planning policy and the resulting balanced sex ratio provide both opportunities, but more importantly, challenges to the women development progress in China. So can I ask you, do you have any suggestions on how to further promote gender equality and women empowerment in countries like China? And my second question is, again, as you've mentioned in your speech and Carol mentioned in her question, is concerned with the traditional culture. Discrimination against women is often associated with the traditional culture. So I'm wondering, does UN Women have certain agenda to separate and eradicate those outdated and discriminative parts without harming the good? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wan. Next is Dr. Graham Finlay, UCD School of Politics and International Relations. Graham.
Thank you again for a lovely speech. And my question is similar, but is about what lens or commitment is going to be primary if some conflicts occur. Because one problem is that the 3 commitments pursued by UN Women and urged upon us in your speech, human rights, public participation, and tackling structural inequalities, can all come into conflict with each other. For example, implementing the main human rights instrument in this area, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, has been seen as requiring governments to combat patriarchal cultural attitudes prevailing in society, which has the potential to inhibit other individuals' rights to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and to manifest their religion or belief. Or public participation can actually reinforce structural inequalities or threaten the enjoyment of human rights. Finally, addressing structural inequalities might require interventions that circumvent public participation or curtail other individuals' access to the substances of various human rights. These conflicts, as the CEDAW example suggests, may be particularly acute where gender interventions are concerned. So how will UN Women navigate these tensions in the post-2015 environment? And which of these 3 forms of commitment will be a priority for UN Women should conflicts between them arise?
Thanks, Graham. Michelle, you're on again. Sorry.
I understand why you don't want to answer these questions. Because if I had the recipe, we will be in another world, I have to say. So let me just share with you some thoughts. I don't have first of all, how could I say it? I was thinking while I was listening to you. You know, the United Nations are the member states. it's not up to us to solve the problems of the nations. We work and support the efforts of governments, parliaments, and civil society. We don't replace them. So that's very important, because that gives us some capacities, but not others. The second thing is, if we want real transformational and sustainable change, it has to be based on ownership. It has to be based on countries believing and pushing towards a common agenda, or their national agenda that prioritizes human rights, gender equality, justice, democracy, etc. And I say this because what I spoke is how I see things should be. We should do things. But I can assure you that lots of countries who don't, and lots of governments that don't agree with me. I have been in countries that tell you, oh, gender equality is essential, as long, and we believe in that so much in the concept. But in implementation, we have a profound disagreement. Because I believe in gender equality as long as it doesn't affect the principal function of a woman, educating its own children. And I'm not going to go into any Ireland comment on Constitution about that. But clearly, so I don't come here to say to the Irish government, to the Irish Parliament, you have to change Article 41.2. I'm not coming to do this. But I can make comments on saying it looks like this kind of situation are not the ones who will really incentivize to progress. So I want to explain to you that we do as much as we can, because we also want to continue working with governments. We're not here God who comes and tells everyone who has to do, but we do, on one hand, can identify issues that needs to be or dramatically change or whatever, and offer our support when we are in the capacity of supporting. That is a global thing I want to explain to you. So we're not that tomorrow I go to a country and say, from tomorrow on you do this and this. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work not only on UN Women and the Secretary General, and you have seen how many conflicts we try to solve, and unfortunately, there are, where some decisions are made are not in the individual situation. But having said that, I'm not saying we cannot do anything. I'm saying that what we need to do, and for example, in terms of social and cultural norms. Yes, how this will be included in the post-2015 agenda, I cannot tell you today. But there's two things I want to mention. When we're discussing on the 2015 post-2015 agenda, the first thing is that doesn't mean that we have to stop working from now on and discuss the whole day long on these issues, because we are every day working on social and cultural norms. We're every day finding ways to tackle all these issues. And I have to say that, and today was part of the discussion, but another discussion, the conversation with President Higgins, I do not believe that there is any religion that really could sustain based in any of its very important texts that damage to women can be made, to girls can be made. There's no single text that supports FGM. No single text. So, for example, FGM is a social norm. It's not a religious issue, it's a social norm. And the way to change social norms is to work with the community, the religious leaders, the parents, the mothers, and say, and try to find another social norm that can maintain the symbolism of a girl who passes to be a woman, but avoids the damage of the women. That's not easy. It's not a matter of women. We need men. We need men saying, we don't want to marry girls who are cut. We want to be, so we need to build that coalition, if I may say, of forces. And we have had some gains and some successes in some areas. But this is an enormous work. For example, in Ethiopia, we work linking to an early forced marriage and child marriage. Forced first and under the age of marriage. We have worked with religious leaders. And now they're championing, asking for birth certificate, talking to the girl, asking if they want to marry that man, etc., etc. But on the other hand, and that's the problem, it's not only social and cultural. Because what is in the bottom is poverty. Because the majority of those girls who are married forced to a man is because either the family cannot feed them and see that as a better alternative of life for their daughters, either for them and they sell the daughter. So it's not, unfortunately, not unfortunately, as poverty, gender equality is multifactorial. And you cannot intervene in one area. You have to intervene in multiple areas. And that doesn't mean that we have to say, oh, it's so big that we cannot do anything. We do what we can, trying to advance in different areas and trying to produce at the national level, at the institutional level, to work with governments, to work with parliament, to work with civil society, to support laws, policies, to incentivize political will, and to try to produce cultural changes and social social norm changes. And it depends on what we are talking about, and it will change dramatically. Again, a very small example. When I was a child, I would have never imagined that a woman president would be in my country. 5 years before president, I would never imagine that a woman would be president in my country. But after being president, for everyone it was natural. So what I mean to say, that sometimes it's laws, policies, but sometimes are symbolic issues that change mindset completely, not even trying to change it. And in some cases, I think in Chile, no one thinks that a woman is incapable, or at least if he thinks, he doesn't speak out loud about it. That's the other game. So that's good for women anyway. So what I mean to say is that all of these things are very complex. And I know customary laws. But again, we have, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, because of the customary laws, because of the interpretation of the Sharia, etc., women couldn't have land rights, no property, some years ago. So our people started working again with religious leaders, reading the Quran with them, look at interpretation of Sharia law, and in a minute where Kyrgyzstan going out of the civil war, many of the men weren't in the country, the women were in the field. They were producing the food, but they didn't have the land right, they didn't have access to a lot of things. So the religious leaders understood that the best was to try to advance in ensuring women's rights. So they supported and worked with parliament to ensure a government bill on land rights, and today it's not 100%, but it's like 40% of the lands in the hands of the women. So what I mean to tell you is that even all what you said is completely true. And because everything is so intertwined and so complicated, because you're not going to make everything change immediately, is that we always are looking how we can change those obstacles, those culture, those social norms. In some aspects, some issues are linked, but many of them are linked to economic issues, many of them. Because when you have either a single child or either not too many children because the families cannot afford to have it, what you see in a lot of the Asia region, not only in one country, in many countries, is that they prefer to have son. And it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons is because when the son marries, he will bring the wife to the home, and the wife will take care of the elder parents who are poor usually. On the contrary, when there is a daughter, the daughter was going to live in the groom's house, and she's going to take care of his parents. I'm not saying that's the only reason. What I mean to say, in all of these issues, we need to think and look deeply. What are the roots of it? How we can change? And we're doing that. But we understand that the fantastic thing would be if we could find a vaccine. Well, no, it's symbolic, I said, for gender equality and women's empowerment. But the bad news is that there's no silver bullet, there's not a vaccine. It has to be so many things at the same time, and we have to progress as much as possible. Having said that, I think the only possible way is to empower women, to have more women in decision-making position, in the politics, in the economy. Because I can tell you, sometimes you see, and sorry, Minister, nothing personal, you see parliaments, only men discussing women's issues. And I'm not against it, but I think there is a problem in there. Because the experience of women is different than the experience of men. So you cannot. So if you don't have women in some places, maybe you will have progress even slower. So that's why we believe that women's leadership is essential, and we're pushing forwards on that. But also economic empowerment for many different reasons, and at the end because it gives options to women. And in China in particular, we're working on that. We're working with the All China Women's Association in projects in 3 lines. We are working on the local level to develop leadership, women's leadership. So sort of, if I may say, to build a pipeline that will permit that those women will start at the local level but could continue being regional and national leaders. That's one of the things we're working in a project. The second project is an economic empowerment with rural women, how we improve their capacities, their add value to the products, but also how they empower them as persons, etc., etc. How we can help to change their power relationship inside the family, etc. And the third is on violence against women. So in every country, depending on which the main issues are, and respecting ownership, we develop these different projects with governments, with civil society, with different partners. And in terms of, Dr. Graham, I'm not so sure that I agree with you, in the sense that, I mean, inequalities are reinforced by different things. You have economic inequalities, social inequalities, cultural, etc. They are reinforced. But not necessarily zero. Or the human rights approach is I don't see how that could be against public participation, for example. Not necessarily. I mean, it's not, how could I say, it's not cause and effect, I would say. So how we navigate, but as you say, there are many tensions. And how we navigate? Well, the first thing, we try to identify entry points. We try to also find allies in every country. Who is, it doesn't matter if they're women or men, who are the ones who can champion on these different issues. And we also try to, and why, if we prioritize, you said human rights, public participation, what was the last one?
Addressing structural inequalities.
And addressing structural inequalities. Well, one should suppose that if addressing structural inequalities are based on a human rights approach, first of all, because that is what's behind there, to ensure everyone human rights. And I believe in public participation, but there are many places where they don't believe on that, and they feel it as a threat, the civil society. And there are countries that, in discussion with us, they tell me, your partner cannot be the civil society. I mean, it's us, governments. There are countries that feel like that. But what we do, we don't prioritize one versus the other in terms of principles. But we do understand that you have to have a tactic and a strategy. And we navigate between that, and trying to think strategically, but also in the short and the middle term. And it's not easy, and it's not a recipe, and it will depend. And it's not that we are trying to be too pragmatic, but you need to be pragmatic. And you need to identify that you're not going to reach I mean, that in some countries you will be advancing very fast, in others it will take time. And you need to find also to support, to find which are the... So, and let me give you an example. We have in March the Commission on Statute of Women. It's about ending violence against women. And this is so linked to sexual and reproductive rights. And this is a complicated issue in many countries of the world. So we are trying to see how we can get the best possible outcome declaration, but that can be a reality. You know, a beautiful document that's here and helps nothing. So you have to find the right language, but that doesn't mean a setback from international agreements. And we do understand that in gender equality, CEDAW, Beijing, Cairo, the Convention of Child Rights is an international framework that cannot be changed in terms of for the worst. We can ensure implementation, but we can. So it's not easy what you answer, but we try to navigate according to the situation. I don't know if we have time. We have time for more?
So thank you, Michelle. Next couple of questions. Bachelet Bulado, student UCD, PhD in Global Human Development. This programme trains staff from developing world universities up to the level of a PhD. And is it Bachelet?
Yeah.
Bachelet is Vice President for Administration Academic Affairs in Hawassa University in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Michel, for your memorable and inspirational presentation. Mine is a reflection in relation to women participation in development vis-à-vis women participation in the education system. I believe women's participation in development should be associated with their participation in the education system, especially in higher education, or in some form of post-secondary education, which paves the way for further participation in other economic and social activities. Transition from the lower level to the next higher level is mostly affected by an early age management of the children. Getting them right at the primary school age requires a great deal of involvement from the parents and the school with the required facilities. Unfortunately, 85% of this age cohort population don't have this chance in some parts of the world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. On one hand, there has been no pre-primary schools that can be afforded by low and middle income households, even in big cities. On the other hand, 40% of adult population are illiterate to understand the importance of this level of education. I believe we should do something on these critical inputs for balanced participation at each level. And ultimately, at the labor market, in business, in politics, in socio-economic decision-making process, and in other leadership roles. Saying this, I have two comments that I believe the UN should include in its next Millennium Development Goals, given that it will happen. One is universal pre-primary school for sub-Saharan Africa, like it was then for primary school. Second, universal adult education supported by a children's coaching skills package, which has to do a lot with what Mitchell talking about. This is a cultural and social barriers which is embedded within the mind of the parents and other stakeholders. Your Excellency, what's your view on this? Thank you very much.
Yes, very next is Grace Duffy, student, TCD, UCD Masters in Development Practice. Grace.
Firstly, thank you, Madam Bachelet, for a wonderful speech. I have a very brief question about the role of young people today. So, as students of development, myself and my classmates are very aware of and very interested in issues of gender. So just in your personal opinion, how would you like to see students and young people, such as ourselves, direct our energy over the coming years? And secondly, what advice would you provide to those of us who are seeking to really become involved in this area? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Grace. Now, we have a third question. I don't know whether I'll take it just at the present time. We go ahead. And this is from Ms. Ciara Galvin, who is the youth media person for the Irish presidency. And the proceedings here have been webcast, so there should be a number of questions coming through. So, Ms. Ciara Galvin.
Thank you. Yes, I've been following the Twitter feed today, and there's been quite a lot of Twitter activity. We've had quotes and pictures live from the audience, so thank you everyone who engaged on #Kapu, both here and on the web stream. We've had a few questions come through that I think have already been addressed and answered just on how to empower women and the benefits of empowering women. But I do have 3 questions for you from Muireann O'Dwyer, Jean Spillane and Brian O'Connor, which I'm going to ask you together. I think they're kind of linked. So the first question. Even in democracies, continued income inequality sees disengagement among poorer people. How do we ensure leaders represent the powerless? Second question. Pardon? Powerless, yes. How do we ensure leaders represent powerless? What can citizens do to take ownership in driving gender equality globally in the context of post-2015 development goals? And is it possible for the UN itself to set an example of inclusive governance within UN structures, or is political will not there? Thank you.
Now, Michelle, this is your last test.
The most close to a vaccine is education. Vaccine to gender to inequalities as a whole, but of course in gender inequality. We know so much what the difference is, not only for the women itself, but also for the children. There is 50% more survival 5-year-old children with a mother knows to read versus the mother who doesn't know how to read. The difference in the prognosis of a boy or a girl in a rural area of Guatemala, according to studies of the World Bank, the main issue that will mean that that little boy or little girl could become somebody with really higher opportunities is the level of education of the mother. But also, of course, we know from all the studies that as long as the girls stayed at school, the less the risk of maternal mortality and because of early forced marriage, early pregnancy, less rates of HIV/AIDS, less rates of rape, and of course all the benefits of education. That I'm not. So I truly believe on that. I have to say, though, that the experience doesn't show, because in some time in the developed world, I mean, in the world that works on development, it sort of, so I say education is essential, but the experience shows too that education does not guarantee everything. And I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about I'm talking about very capable women have not been able to be CEO of a company because of different other obstacles. So education is essential, but it's not enough. So we need to have people educated. We need to have girls as long as possible at school. We need to not only focus on primary education, but also secondary and tertiary education, being it university or technical, whatever the kind of area that we're talking to. And me personally, of course, I'm a pediatrician, and I am a, how could I say, a believer in initial education. But to be honest, today in the world, girls cannot go to secondary education because they have to pay, and poor families cannot pay for secondary education. So for me, pre-primary or initial education is essential. And I think we need to try to move in that direction. But I'm not sure this will be accepted by member states. Because at the end, you have to know that what will come will be of a negotiation of the 193 member states of the United Nations. That's how this thing works. Because everyone sitting there will have to commit that they will put political will, priority, and funds on these priorities. I truly believe that the sooner we start, we are able to reduce dramatically the inequalities derived from the crib, if I may say, where you were born. So for me, initial education is essential. And for some, initial education is too expensive. But there are very good studies, and there are people here in Dublin who have done those studies. They're Canadian, one of them, but they're working now here, that shows, because usually people calculate how much it costs, but never calculate how much it costs not to do determined policies, not to lose the tremendous potential of those children. So I would say I would love to have that as a goal. I'm not sure we can get it, to be very honest. I usually am very honest. And adult education, of course, is essential. In many countries, even in developed countries, many people, women in particular, can study, but then they go and take care of the children, and they don't have the possibility, and if they want to go back to work, they need to relocate. But also other people who couldn't have more opportunities. It's not that you're not a child anymore and you lost all opportunities for your life. So adult education programs are very important. And I hope they could be, I hope both could be considered, but I don't know if we're going to get there. I agree with you, but I think it's very difficult, to be honest. The youth, what advice? I would say, if I would be young again, I will rephrase, because I believe youth is a matter of attitude, not a matter of age. And I will die very young, very young. I know young people that look very old, mentally speaking. No, but if I would have been, and so I usually use, when I talk to elder people, I said, you that have accumulative youth. So I'm a person with accumulated youth. No, but if I would have been young as you again, I would go to the field. I think, of course, many people can work in different levels in education, continue in the academy, or go to the political arena, etc. And that's very important. But not everybody wants to be involved in politics, for example. I think it's important, and I pass the message. Women, you should get involved in politics. Because politics is not only about running for a post. It's also about your social commitment. You can work in many different areas, etc. And I believe politics is the way of changing things. And not the only way, though, but it's an important way. But I believe that things happen on the ground. And that is our attitude in UN Women. We are diminishing a little bit headquarters and trying to strengthen our capacity on the ground, because what matters is to work with those real and concrete women and girls, and try accordingly what area you are interested in to provide either technical assistance, if people are a lawyer and you are in the DRC, legal assistance to women who have been gang raped, etc. So there's so many different things that can be done. But also, I think young people have the tremendous opportunity of looking what has happened in the 50 or 60 years of the world in development. And ask yourself, is it working, the models that we have developed? Or if it's not working, what is missing? And I have the impression that a lot of things that I talk in my lecture, I'm not going to bore you repeating it, have been missing. It's written in every document. I was not inventing the wheel when I spoke in the lecture. But it's not happening. It's not the central part, the priority part. Because I believe that empowerment of people has not been strongly enough emphasized in the real development activities. To tell you, when I arrived in UN Women and I had meetings with a lot of women from civil society, they would ask me, please don't you do the projects on the ground. We are women's organization, human rights organization, we have this and this and this expertise, use us, because what we need to do is to not replace them, is to support them to build national capacity. So I think there's so much to be done, and the world there is full of needs, and on the other hand, full of hope. So I would say, don't give up on your interest on development and gender equality, but try to transform knowledge into action. Because you are in an age you can do it. Afterwards you want to become older, have children and whatever, and that's much more complicated. And not necessarily you have to do it in the UN, but you can also apply to the UN. But there's many other organizations, and I'm serious about that. But also think about politics. I think it's also very important. How to empower women, I talk about that. Oh, I'm trying to understand my writing. Just a second, please. What can citizens do? Well, first of all, I think, and I hope, and the Minister was mentioning, that in the European Union the idea is, for example, to try to make massive, well, I don't know, maybe that's exaggerated, but big consultations where people, I mean, consultations that are not necessarily presential. They can be through, and we did it that way, through all kinds of ways, using technology, etc. I think it's essential that people get involved in the discussion of the post-2015 agenda. Because it's true that member states will decide that in the General Assembly in 2015, but it's so important that governments, that politicians, that people who make decisions listen to the people. And because I had told you before, there is a huge risk that some people believe, for example, that gender equality shouldn't remain as a standalone goal. And if that disappears, probably will disappear the importance as a main issue in the agenda, or on inequality. So what people can do to let know, I mean, what people, organized people, our constituencies, and people who are making decisions care about what their constituencies think. And they care a lot when elections are soon also. So it's very important that people use that power and try to influence, the decision making. Also, people can do it in their own lives. Because when you have a young father and a young mother, can make a huge difference in how internally at home, what is the model of the relations of power, and how is respect and the way you solve tensions or situations, that's the way how children will learn. A little girl who learns from since she's baby that she's a person with rights, respected, etc. It's different. So there's so many different levels that citizens can do. Or people in the workplace that see that women are subject to disrespect, to discrimination, to exclusion. So there's thousands of things that a normal citizen, if I may say, can do depending on their situation, its capacity to get organized with others, to form coalitions, or to be part of a global movement. So there's so many different things that can be done. Did I understood correctly that the question was, what is UN doing inside home on this issue? Was that the question, isn't it?
Say a little more. If you start to speak, say a little more.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, the UN is doing a lot of things with little partners in terms of the agenda. But also the UN is doing things at home, because we say UN cannot demand countries to do if it doesn't lead by example. So internally the UN is developing, and we are the ones who have been coordinating the efforts developing a plan of action that will permit to promote women in the UN agencies and also to give them the chance to be in senior positions, but also to discuss a lot of issues concerning particular needs of women. The other thing that we have been trying to do is to put more women in high-level positions, as USG, Under-Secretary Generals, ISG, Deputy Secretary Generals, as head of missions, etc., etc. So also lead by example in high-level positions. But we also are working very strongly, so the whole UN is doing its work on development in some cases, in humanitarian when there is the case, in human rights or whatever area it is, including the gender perspective and ensuring that everyone does more and better for women, because we need to improve what we're doing. So we are working very strongly. And the first question, I really cannot understand my writing. Something like, even in democracies, oh, how do we ensure that leaders represent the powerless? Vote for the right ones, I would say. Really.
Thank you very much. There are two further tweets. This time they're directed at me, not to our guest. And I'm taken to task for being somewhat familiar with our guest tonight, and that I should be referring to Madam Under-Secretary General. So I apologise, Madam Under-Secretary General. But she did give me the opportunity just to give a plug for Irish Aid in relation to consultation. We are preparing our next major event is on the 15th and 16th of April, and that is a conference, major conference, international conference with the Mary Robinson Foundation and with the World Food Programme, and that will be very much a bottom-up conference where it would be largely people from the developing world who will be giving us their experiences from various personnel, various communities, rather than from a top down. So I think we have to get the consultative process right in relation to preparing for the post-2015 agenda.